Hi, it's Susan from World Peaceful. And as is always the case with my videos, I got inspired to do this one as well. You know what happens is I get this inner feeling I need to respond to something. And in the case of, I have to say, the attack on the Iranian General, I saw as a provocation. That's how it appeared immediately. The inspiration came up around Archduke Ferdinand, who was the catalyst for the First World War. He was murdered. I saw a parallel with the situation of this general being murdered. Then I thought about criminality in international relations, because murder is murder. The traditional wars, which I don't necessarily believe we've ever needed, but we seem to go there believing that we can destroy that enemy. And those who've been watching my videos will remember I've talked about the work of Byron Katie in respect of I must destroy the enemy in order to feel safe. These are the lies we tell ourselves, particularly males. It comes from a very primitive aspect of the psyche that sees in its world something threatening, and its instinct is to destroy it, not think through what are the drivers involved in the conflict. I'm trained in conflict resolution and a peacemaker, and I dreamed I was teaching peace. So I feel very strong connection to a world peaceful future. Men have glorified war, which again is a misnomer. There is no glory in the murder of another human being. It actually works against our nature. You cannot win your wars ever, because the place of the work of peacemaking is within the person themselves. This includes those in high positions within the military. This includes corporations who have vested interests in furthering market share through the destruction of a nation state. The murders we're talking here are massive crimes against humanity. When we're seeing murders taking place in Afghanistan of innocent civilians, we're seeing murders taking place in the Balkans. We saw murders taking place in Syria, murders taking place in Iraq. Now things are being positioned to murder civilians in Iran. That's what I see as a civilian. Now, for those who operate out of mindsets of looking for an enemy, dissent becomes the enemy. Anything that counters what you think is right becomes the enemy, because you cannot question your own belief systems, because they are identified with very strongly within you. You think you are your beliefs. I'll give you an example. Nationalism is an area where we believe strongly. For example, I say I'm Australian. But similarly to my video I did at Christmas, where I was reading from one of the greatest teachers, as you look into the mystery which has manifested around you, and you look for truth, what is that? How did it get there? How was it created? In the room that you're in, look at some object and then investigate what brought that object into this reality I call my home, or whatever it is. It comes at our calling. It comes at our choosing. And yet beyond it, it comes from something we have no idea about. We did not create the earth. We did not create the resources on the earth. We did not create ourselves. Yet we act as if we are God in the way that we dispense judgment and justice. We make alliances. These groups are for me, these groups are against me, in order to build coalitions of righteousness against that other. And the same applies with the other can do the same thing. Whenever you react and not respond, you escalate the violence and the risk to the people. My interest as a peacemaker is the people who are impacted by the decisions of those who have found their way into positions of power. These days, we're starting to understand more about people paying their way into power, business interests garnering influence through donations in order to get into positions of power, people knowing the right people speaking the right language, people holding the same religion, gaining curry in order to get into power. This is not in the interest of the people because they are not selected from the people. They are not champions for the people. They do not care about the impacts on the people, regardless of the rhetoric that we hear. I've come up against pathological mindsets myself in my life, and I know that there is a care factor of 0. They do not care at all. It's as if that feeling, loving, compassionate, empathetic part of humanity is gone. That is what enables bad things to happen in the names of democracy, in the name of God, in the name of protection, defense. These are all fallacious labels used in order to justify violence. We allow violence to be put in front of our children and we call it entertainment, yet it programs. We cheer at the enemy at the other side. We create competitive activities in order to feel power over that other party. These are the old paradigm activities that serve no one ultimately. It's an endless cycling of war without end. These are not only militaristic war games, they're also the wars within humanity, where we will not resolve the inner discord within us. We will not look into our judgment and question it for truth. We refuse to allow ourselves to be vulnerable because we fear we'll be seen as weak, when the vulnerability is the greatest strength of humanity in truth. Revealing who you are is courage. Concealing is cowardice. Even if it's done for advantage, it's cowardice because you're tricking the other party. You might be cleverly doing this or that. It doesn't matter. There's no courage in that. The old soldiers, and I'm going back in time now, the ones who really did defend the people, the men who stood before the people to protect them and were the ones that were hurt or killed. These people exhibited real courage because they were willing to lay down their life for the people. And this is a mantra used in modern warfare, even though we're dealing now with cyber warfare and we're dealing now with using weaponry to strike targets inclusive of civilians in a remote way using drones. This is where we disconnect from the carnage on the ground. I've been involved in the idea of filming people when I was a research analyst, and I was informed that there was a disconnect at times when I filmed things that were sensitive and I didn't really feel it because I was behind technology. It disconnected me. Same applies with email, same applies with Twitter, Facebook. When we're posting, there's a remoteness to all of this communication, which means we're insensitive to the needs of other people. Now, what holds the global community fabric together is our sensitivity to each other, is our respect of each other. I may not agree with you, but I will defend, I won't say to the death because I don't believe in that, I will defend your right to say it. In other words, I will defend your right to freedom of your expression. Because you were born with the ability to communicate, you have a right to say it. I may not like it, but I will allow you to say it because there might be something I might learn in that. And you know what? Maybe down the track, I actually recognize that I needed to hear it. But if we block, suppress, shut down adversarial viewpoints, we are the greatest losers. We're not the biggest winners, believe me, we're not. Because we've just shut down the diversity in our own world as we attempt to force the image of our worldview onto everyone. Now, I'm not necessarily speaking in this particular instance of nation states here. I'm speaking about individuals who might be utilizing those nation states, causing conflict between nation states, and there are vested interests in respect of the marketing of weaponry that gets profits from this conflict, endless war theory, which has now been manifested into actual wars that civilians are killed in. These are not your traditional lines of wars where you've got two warring parties facing off each other like in the First World War. That's not happening anymore. Hasn't happened for a long time. Civilians are being caught in the crossfire and they're being murdered by the millions. But because of the sanitization of television, laptops, the normalization of violence, which is a deliberate construct for those who want more soldiers, for those who want a violent world in order to suppress the natural impetus of people to express who they are. I want to go still for a moment because of the gravity of what I see in the inaction around global peace, the lack of commitment to truth in this world where we so deceive one another and we market it and spin it to make it digestible to the public as if it's somehow a good thing. None of it is a good thing. If it brings out of that terrible carnage and conflict and pain and suffering of so many, if it brings out a desire and an activity for peace. And this is not peace in any wussy. I'm not talking about some ideal. When I speak of peace, I'm talking about our true nature is peace. When you sit with a coffee with your friends discussing things, you're feeling happy, you're at peace. When you're having a nice meal at a restaurant, really enjoying the ambience, that's at peace too. When you're at home with your children and you're looking at them playing or you're seeing them growing into young adults or perhaps they're visiting you with their families and you feel this joy, that's peace. So get clear about when I speak of peace, it's not an anti-war doctrine, although I have to speak to war because in a war setting there is no peace, no matter how you dress it up. Not even if you win, there's no peace because you've ignored the carnage you've left behind. It's like in a domestic violence situation where we'll have to use the situation of the wife because I'm hearing more and more stories from women who are being beaten up. These are on the street, by the way, homeless, like myself. The domestic violence situation, I was explained to it. A woman I spoke with just recently told me about her situation. She was beaten, she was knifed, she was intimidated, she lived under constant threat in her home. She was a strong woman, she said. She did not know how she got herself into it. She said it kind of happened slowly where he exercised more and more suppression and control. The violence increased as he did not tolerate any confrontation to his power, which was in reality powerlessness parading as power. If you have power, you do not need to defend anything. When you know yourself, when you are at peace with yourself, there is no reaction. The domestic violence is simply another form of bullying, which is another form of violence. I'm using the feminine example at the moment because there's a very large number of women being brutalised in their homes. And I weigh it up on the other side as a peacemaker because there's also men who are silently suffering from the verbal abuse of women, which is violence as well. So I'm never anti-man or anti-woman. I'm not even anti-violence. What I am is I'm stating that this will not serve you. I'm providing an example of how the same energy plays out in a domestic setting. The same defences arise, the same preemptive attack occurs in order to frighten that other from leaving. In the case of domestic violence, preemptive strike in order to prevent, to frighten the other from attacking you. But as I said in my previous video, until you question your thinking around the need to destroy and those marketing weapons of warfare, you're clearly not going to want to disband your industry. So you will see people like myself as the enemy because that's all you're trained in. Yet if your child was me, if I was your child, if I was your wife, it's a little harder to use that idea of the enemy with someone you love. It's easy when it's a stranger. You say, oh, we don't want people thinking like that. But what happens if all this conflict leads us to zero-sum game where all Earth systems collapse? We've got environmental disaster happening. Here in Australia, we've got massive fires. Never been seen before. The fireys are so upset with the lack of action on climate change because of the oil wars. This situation with Iran is about oil. That's how these two issues dovetail. Constantly on the bandwagon of expansion of power through energy. Let's use it up until the last drop. We don't care if, let's say, the axis shifts. We don't care if the people are without power when it all goes. We don't want free energy. We don't want to meter. We want to meter everything. We want every square inch of Earth Inc. to be metered because corporational thinking is at play here, combined with militaristic strategic planning. These two are fused into another form of power on the planet that is unaccountable to the people. This is the real problem for all of us civilians who are watching in horror at yet another emergence of war. But again, harking back to the climate change issue of which the children are rising up, and now the adults are starting to get more and more upset because they see no action because of the corruption that's happening at the highest levels, where those who have vested interests are occupying positions of power and who are listening to other voices, not the people. They use their positions, the access to resources, in order to spin and market to the people in ways that the people have to accept. This is not a respect of democracy. This is not respecting humanity. This is not secure for our global population at all. In fact, the global population is being put in harm's way without doubt through the nexus of energy interests and the collapsing of the environment. When we have free energy options that have been known about since the turn of the last century, 19th century, with Nikola Tesla. That is a crime against humanity that was denied. It shouldn't even be commercialised. It should be free energy. It should be made available to the entire planet. We would not be confronting today the melting of the ice caps, the permafrost melting. We would not be confronting the radiation coming in from the atmosphere due to the ozone depletion. I'm just going still because I'm feeling for what's going on. There's a lot of species that are dying too. The stewardship is not there at the highest levels. It's CEOs. They're not stewards. They are inculcated into a mindset that only knows how to profit and maintain its power because its whole identity is attached to power. They don't want to lose their houses and boats, and they don't want to go to jail. So these are the fears that accelerate, if you like, control. There's also crimes here too. And as the world community becomes more aware of the crimes that have been done in their name, large crimes, the drug running, pedophilia rings, trafficking of humans around the world, all in the name of money, piece of paper, or digits on a balance sheet. All for that you do it. And I just sit back, who's homeless, I have no money, and yet I have peace. Not at all times, but I have it for the most part. I'm still working on it because it takes time to recalibrate one's own self into looking at the world in peace. Now, I've spoken passionately, but I'm not angry. Because truth has to surface. We can't all sit there and say the emperor has no clothes. Well, no, the emperor is seen for who the emperor is. The emperor is not an emperor. This is a racket. I'll attach one of my blogs which says war is a racket. It was actually written by a soldier. And of course, when I was in the peace area, I came across refuseniks. I came across soldiers who had decided they didn't want to participate in illegal wars of aggression. And that really is the situation now in the world of all those who are jumping on board and saying, oh, well, I need the money. Well, think of your children. What are the ramifications of involvement with criminality? Because we are looking at criminality here. There are solutions on the table that could have been picked up 100 years ago and they weren't because of greed. So one of the key issues is greed. Now, where does greed come from? I'm not enough. So the raising of children has not been done in a way that's made them feel secure, fulfilled as human beings. They're often insecure. That's why we have huge insecurity and the need for security. It's coming from insecurity which was grounded in us as children because we didn't feel safe. We were also exposed to too much violence, and even in my time, the violence is far worse today. But even when I was young, I still have memories of particular films that frightened me as a child, filled me with the sense of the world's not safe when it is. People are safe. That's why I travelled the world, was to test that. They are safe. And in fact, when you let go of all the economic insecurity, which is created through I have to work, and these are all narratives. I have to work in order to pay the mortgage, so we're indebted. We create debt. So in order for the greed to flourish, the debt has to exist. Because when people are in debt, they'll have to work, and they're working at things they don't love, which makes them unhappy. When they're unhappy, they fill their lives with things that aren't really fulfilling, but they try and fill the gap. That's how the gap is created, by doing the things in life we don't feel called to do. We're not following our nature or our higher expression. Some might say we're not following God. And everybody has their own version of what that, the word entity was there, but it's not actually an entity, it's an energy. And it's an intelligent energy. No, it's not on a smart meter, because I call that intelligent energy as well, where everything's been monitored through our electricity because corporations own it. I'm talking about the real energy that we have to tap into if we want to sustain our world. It's not going to come from coal-fired plants. It's not going to come from oil. It comes from tapping into the 0 point field where there's endless and abundant energy. The real energy to tap into from a spiritual, peaceful perspective is the trust that all is in divine order. Now people go, what, divine order? What's that? It sounds a bit wussy. She sounds a bit out there. Sorry. Laugh at my own self, which is good. So let me go into that spiritual divine aspect, which a word has actually been used for thousands of years, the word divine in truth. But in the Western narrative, religion's often associated with this higher power. But this higher power existed long before religion. This higher power is not religious at all. It has no thought, in actual fact. It has no thought, and yet people would find that hard to relate to. Well, how did it create the earth? And yes, the earth is also natural selection in that it has evolved, but most definitely an intelligence created the earth itself and all the species upon it. The only thing I can sort of connect with is vision. There's an envisaging. It's not a thought. When I went to Newgrange in Ireland, I remember seeing, this was a sacred site. It was, they had standing stone there and they had what they call burial mound, ancient Celtic site. Even had carved rune language, Norse. Is it Norse? It's been a while since I looked at the runes. But it's nonetheless these incredible inscriptions that were carved into the walls in this burial mound. But the thing that really caught my eye was the spirals that were, and I wear a spiral, that were carved into the rock. And I felt it like a code. So the best way I could perhaps articulate, it's even hard to say the words around how creation happens, but really I'm getting the word code. Sacred geometry. Balance and harmony is how the system, the actual natural system works. It works out of homeostasis. It has gravitational energies which attract and repel, which is the engine of the universe, I feel. But bear in mind, there'll be a lot more to it than what I'm communicating. I'm just saying what I feel. Peace is balance, is homeostasis, is stillness. When you're at peace, there is no enemy because you recognize whatever you see in your world is a reflection of yourself. You know that you can't fight anyone because as you push out a certain negative energy, it comes back. It's a universal law. It's not retaliation. So things can come back at you because you put that out. The world is like, or the universe, if you like, is like a mirror. It mirrors back to you. So if you don't like what you're seeing in the world, you have to look at yourself, not the world. It's also the duty of those who see the blind horseman on the blind horse to tell him he's heading towards the abyss, and that's precisely what these preemptive activities are doing. It is most definitely a horse out of control, and it can be a spiral to the bottom, or it can be stopped. And the only way the bullying in our world can be stopped is by firstly looking into your own violence and dealing with it there, because that's how you get familiar with the other party, is through yourself. We've all done it. It doesn't work. It just creates more and more powerlessness, which creates more and more conflict. And powerlessness is the very mover of all violence. People are seeking power. That's why they project it. There's nothing courageous in violent activities. These are all activities designed to render what is feared powerless or destroyed. But when you destroy the other, you destroy yourself. So this gearing up for conflict in Iran will come back again onto the United States through a universal law. Now, how Iran decides to respond to that, and I see they've already put a price on the head of the US president, which I don't think is wise. And a Rumi comes to my mind. So are we going to continue to fight in this way? Or are we going to look into our own violence, which we project outward and comes back to us? You have to understand how the real conflicts are working on an energetic level. Love and forgiveness and mercy align with the universal blueprint. Anger, hatred, revenge, pain are aligning with destructive blueprint. I also feel to say to those who felt hurt by that assassination, obviously I feel compassion for any human whose life has been taken. My own father died a few months ago and I still miss him terribly. And luckily for me, my father died in his sleep. I see every human as my family, everyone. I see Trump as my family. I see Scott Morrison as my family. I see the Ayatollahs in Iran as my family. I see Netanyahu as my family. I see Putin as my family. Chinese as my family. The Vietnamese as my family. The Nepal. The Indian. The British. The Canadian. The African peoples as my family. The Japanese as my family. The New Zealanders as my family. The Europeans as my family. The Islanders as my family. Every single one is part of my family. And this family is dysfunctional. This family still uses power to get its own way and refuses to look into its own disruption. It still tries to blame others for its problems. It still reacts out of fear. It beats its chest to frighten off others from looking too closely into the fear and weakness that other feels. Nonetheless, those feelings are not who you are. That is just the darker aspect of our nature that's in the ascendancy if you follow it. You have a choice. You can stop and deeply contemplate the actions that you're taking. Are they going to serve the well-being of all people on this planet who are our family? Are you going to be part of those who destroy our civilization? Are you going to bring about your prophecy of Armageddon, or are you going to bring about universal peace? Because universal peace is sitting there waiting on your welcome. Do you become a peacemaker, or do you go down in history as sinking the ship? And for those who have plans to go off-world, as I've said in previous videos, it follows you karmically. From me, from my perspective, the only way I can relate to the family is allowance. All I can do is maintain unconditional love. When I look at the family and understand they're on a journey, each and every one of them, and how do I know this is the way it's meant to be, this is the way it is? What do I choose? I choose to work for universal peace. And that's what I will and am and have committed my life to. That's why when in 1998 I had the dream I was teaching peace. That was a dream that changed my life. Even living and walking in poverty, without income, without a home, has probably been the greatest liberation for me, because I've learned to no longer fear not having enough, because I've found that life supplies my needs. If I don't fight life and demand this or that, and I go with the flow in gratitude, it's just incredible how abundant life really is. I don't need to go and fight for anything. It doesn't mean that I won't speak the truth passionately like I have today. I will. But for me personally, I don't carry the fears that you carry, and I've got nothing. I don't care about losing reputation. I don't have one to lose. I'm not frightened of hunger because I trust life. If my life was to end, I'll see my dad. They say that, this is higher sort of wisdom, says that the greatest moment of your life is your death, actually. I always find that interesting. Thought, yeah, it'll be an interesting moment going through that tunnel, seeing the love emanating back and then laughing, because we live on, folks. And that's a provable fact. We live on. So how we live our lives at this time is up to us. If you keep fearing death and you stay silent because, I don't want to rock the boat, well, it's appeasement. You're giving your tacit consent to violence that's going on in your world. Why not participate and help your family? It's actually the love of the tyrant love for the tyrant that enables action to take place, because you'll never do anything if you don't love them. And I do love them, thankfully. And I do, because I understand that people are playing out of what they understand. Everyone, all players, and there's great fear beneath it. And if they're really frightened, they'll suppress it, and they will make sure that they ignore it. They'll create a story around it as to justify why they do what they do, but they know deep down that they're doing the wrong thing. But that's all they know. There's an ignorance around it. Now, I can't criticize a person who doesn't know they don't know. What I promote constantly in my videos is, when you know you don't know, that's the beginning of wisdom. It means you become open to the possibilities of how do we work our way through this problem non-violently. Because I'm caring about those people on the ground in Iran, for example. Very kind people. I've had friends who are Persian. Very, very lovely people. Poets. It's actually a nation of poets and musicians. And some of them are not so keen on the religious side of it. But religion's part of the world we're in. And peace would welcome all religions. Peace welcomes all spirituality. Peace welcomes all non-believers, because everyone has the right to play out their life in the way that they do, I only really speak up is when I can see a harm that's forming, and I sense a feeling of social responsibility for others. I have a very strong instinct of protecting others. Maybe it's a maternal instinct in me, but whenever I see activities take place and I think it's going to cause a further harm to others, I have a very strong protective instinct for those others. Probably that's why I became a peacemaker. I also saw the disruption caused by ego, caused by arrogance, caused by unconsciousness, caused by very masculine aggression that was projected onto others as bullying. I saw that a lot. And my desire to become a peacemaker awakened, and it did it away. I literally had a dream, but it was in form over time when I saw injustices occurring as I was growing up and learning about life. I often would say, why can't we all sit down and work it out? That was the beginning of conflict resolution for me. And you cannot keep fighting these wars and expect to win. You'll never win. The more you push against, the more it comes back on you. And certainly from a strategic point of view, I think these posturings, which are being driven by corporate interests, are not in the interests of the people who they say they represent. I also see it as a zero-sum game. I can see it not working. But if unconsciousness is left to its own devices, when you can see that it could risk millions of people, there's an irresponsibility that steps back and does nothing. Now, to do proactive change, you have to go still, and you have to tap into the real power. You have to formulate an intention. How can I be constructive? How can I be peaceful? How can I utilize my talents and abilities in order to bring about homeostasis on the planet? How do we bring humankind together? How do we raise awareness that we're all one? How do we de-escalate the violence? What sort of world do we want to create here? What does a world fit for children look like? How do we de-escalate our consumption given an economic system that's no longer working in light of a sustainable future where we must learn to think differently? Do we still work on price mechanisms? Do we still extract resources and value add and sell those items? Or do we look at other means and ways of creating a natural economy where gross national happiness becomes the objective rather than gross domestic or gross national product? These are the real fundamental questions that have to start being asked now, because it's not working. And we must do this for the children. So I will leave it there. I send our world real peace. I ask you to search within for real truth, to use intelligence in a way that brokers the peace, to assess what has gone out of control in respect of authority in the world. We also have to look at criminal courts, that mass class actions can happen if we are feeling that government is out of control. If a crime is being created at the highest levels, there needs to be a legal implication so that we don't go to war, but we actually ensure that we have a world understanding of what's appropriate conduct and what's not appropriate conduct. We have to work in harmony with natural law so that real justice arises rather than brokered, negotiated business transactions through the courts. That does not teach the people the consequence of one's own actions. We also need to bring into early childhood very loving environments with parents present, not childcare centres. That's a recipe for disaster. I've worked in the childcare centres. Children need, at very early ages, to be nurtured by mothers and fathers. They need loving parents around them full time when they're young, because they're learning about love at that time. They're learning, and they actually need the loving connection. They're not ready. They're not developmentally ready to be hived off. The word hiving is correct, into institutionalised education. Whilst I did like the curriculum within the early childhood area, I could see the social emotional needs of the children cannot be met by young women, particularly young women who've never had children or don't know how to nurture. These are not schools. They have to be incubation places where a child is completely loved. We need a village to raise a child, is the truth of the matter. We need grandparents there. So this is food for thought for those who are crafting a future that is not in the best interests of humanity. I send you love. More than probably anyone, I send you love, because you're the one who's most in need of it. Take care.